Looking to break free of the Google Play Store or need an app that can't be hosted there? There's open source software for that. F-Droid, coming up next on FLOSS Weekly. FLOSS Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Stay in control when it comes to your company's access points and authentication. LastPass makes enterprise-level security simple. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Jonathan Bennett and Simon Phipps, episode 572, recorded April 1st, 2020, F-Droid. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Did you know that 91% of all cyber attacks start with an email? To uncover the threats hiding in your Office 365 account, get a secure and free email threat scan at barracuda.com/floss. And by CashFly. Give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with CashFly CDN and be 30% faster than the competition. Learn more at twit.cashfly.com. Hey, I'm Jonathan Bennett, and welcome to FLOSS Weekly. We've got a great show for you today. First off, joining me is Simon Phipps. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Jonathan. Pleasure to be back on the show again. How are things going for you over there in wherever it is you are?
Oh, I'm over here in the Midland of the United States, which thankfully has, for the most part, escaped this thing, although we've got like 11 or 15 cases in the county where I'm in and like 500 in my state. So we are sheltering in place, but hey, for FLOSS Weekly, it doesn't really matter. We all Skype in anyway.
Absolutely. You know, here, I work here from my wonderful office, which is a 20-yard commute from home. And the only difference I've seen is that the parcel delivery guys don't require a signature anymore. That's the only indication that anything has changed.
Hey, that's kind of handy. Well, today is not This Week in Coronavirus, although I think every show is just a little bit. Today is This Week in Free and Open Source Software, FLOSS Weekly. And we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about F-Droid, which is kind of an alternative to the Play Store for Android. And but it only hosts free and open source software. Simon, what do you know about this?
Well, I've been using F-Droid for quite a long time on a variety of devices, and so I'm fairly familiar with it. It's a venerable player in the world of maintaining your software freedom. And I think what's really interesting about it is that they have a process for checking that software isn't rogue software. I think we'll want to find out a little bit about that. And apart from that, it's another app store that you can get apps from. A few apps that you can't get from any other app store. The apps that don't want to be subject to Google's terms and conditions are in the F-Droid store rather than in the Play Store.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we're not going to have much of a how does Randall put it? Much of a proxy for the audience, because we're both somewhat familiar with this. Before we get any further into F-Droid, I guess I should mention poor Randall had some intestinal distress the other day and did not sleep very well last night, and so I got tagged at the last minute, and so it's Simon and I running the show, and we have today Hans-Christoph Steiner. I bet he gets that a lot. Hans-Christoph Steiner is going to be with us today, and we'll bring him on in just a moment. But before we do that, I do have an announcement to read. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Barracuda is the provider of cloud-enabled, enterprise-grade security solutions that protect email, networks, data, and applications. Suddenly, you have dozens, hundreds, or maybe thousands of employees working remotely. Each one of them getting tons of email every day, making them vulnerable. 91% of all cyber attacks start with just an email. Spear phishing, ransomware, account takeover, conversation hijacking. Multiply that by however many employees you've got. Times how many emails they get per day. One click on the wrong email can cost you money, customers, and even your reputation. Barracuda researchers have seen a steady increase in the number of coronavirus-related spear phishing attacks since January, and they've observed a recent spike of 667% for this type of attack since the end of February. Get the protection you need from your company with Barracuda Total Email Protection, which includes all-in-one email security backup and even archiving, AI-based protection from spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise. An automated instant response that gives you options to quickly and efficiently address attacks. Security awareness training to educate your workforce so that your employees can be the first line of defense against attacks. We've been tracking these kind of email attacks, even on the over on the Hackaday security column. I've been watching this over the last few weeks. And it's ridiculous the different players and actors that are trying to take advantage of this to get people with malicious emails. Right now, there are new attacks impersonating organizations like the World Health Organization, even the CDC in this country. Attackers are utilizing domain spoofing, and they promise information related to the coronavirus, but they're trying to get you to fall into a phishing scam. And what do you do about it? Well, one thing you can do is ensure the safety and security of your business with Barracuda. To uncover the threats hiding in your inbox, get a secure, free email threat scan of your Office 365 account risk-free at barracuda.com/floss. That's barracuda.com/FLOSS. Barracuda, your journey secured. And now let's bring Hans onto the show. Hans, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I think we're good. F-Droid, tell us about it. What's the story with F-Droid?
So, F-Droid is many things, but for most people, it is an app store. Is probably the easier thing to explain it if you're just starting out. It is also, if you're familiar with, say, free software, like people who are using GNU Linux distros, it is something like a distro for your phone, except for the core OS is provided by someone else. It's also it also is, since it's all free software itself, it's also all the pieces you need to run an app store and to automatically build and sign lots of Android apps and publish them.
So is the back end to F-Droid open source as well? If somebody wanted to set up their own little instance of F-Droid, they could?
Yeah, we try to make sure that everything that we use to deliver the apps to the user is available and is open source, and even to the point where, say, we use IRC and Matrix as our primary, and GitLab as our primary tools for working with each other. So those are all free software and open source. We also use Debian runs all our infrastructure. We use things like Ansible to automate the maintenance of the infrastructure. We use and so on and so forth, and then we work with Debian to make sure that the Android SDK itself is also free software. So we try to bring free software to every single piece of the Android ecosystem that we touch.
Mm-hmm. What's the history of this? How did F-Droid get started?
So F-Droid was started by one person, Kieran Gutniks, who in 2010 just started hacking together the basics for building and shipping apps, a client, some simple tools to assemble the Android apps into a repository, and that's where it began. And from the beginning, Kieran set the tone that this is not only about bringing free software, but also that privacy is a central part of the F-Droid community and what we deliver. So from quite early on, the F-Droid community has done something which I think that other kind of free software distros haven't really done, which we have. So we ship free software, that's a standard thing, but then we have what we call anti-features, which are not necessarily against free software, but things that we think that the users wants to know about. So something like whether the app shows ads, whether the app tracks the user, whether the app promotes non-free software, even if it's free software itself, requires things like a non-free network service in order to operate, and so on and so forth.
So every app that gets submitted to F-Droid, does it kind of go through this little miniature security and software licensing audit then?
Yes. So we have two ways that apps come into this store. One is there's people who request it, what we call our RFP, request for packaging tracker. This is a GitLab issue tracker where all you really need to submit is a link to the source code, or other information is appreciated. And then we have some automated checks there that starts the process then where people review it. And then the next step is merge requests. So someone has to write a build recipe and submit it to the F-Droid data, which is the collection of all the build recipes. And then there it's reviewed by the community process. And there if it's a new app, then we look at it a lot more. So there we're looking for things like whether it contains tracking libraries, whether it's showing advertising, all of these entry features. It also then, we do checks to make sure that it can build based on our setup, which has basically a lot of whitelists to make sure that the things that the app build process pulls in is actually free software. And then if you pass all that, you get merged in and then eventually published to everybody and built up, and everything like any other distro, like from Debian to Fedora, et cetera, we build the software on our own builders, which for a lot of Android developers is a bit foreign because they're used to building everything themselves.
Yeah, so I guess full disclosure, I have an app that's hosted on F-Droid now. It's been there for several years. It was actually, I worked with KRF, which may have been the guy that started it back before he left the project. If I remember correctly, go ahead.
I was going to say that's KRT. This Boris, he was a very active reviewer for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he was involved early on, but not Kieran.
Okay, I do remember that there was quite a process to get that app with all of its different libraries that pulled in, kind of through that review process. It almost seems like there was an air-gapped server that actually did the final build. Is that accurate, or am I remembering that wrong?
Yep, that's correct. We have it's not. The build server is not air-gapped because the way Android builds are set up. They're almost always using Gradle, and Gradle is set up to pull in libraries from things like Maven Central, which are giant repositories of Java libraries. And so it'd be very difficult to build anything Java or Android offline these days. So the build happens in an online server, but then the final signing process happens on an air-gapped server. So every Android app has to be signed in order to be valid. And then we also sign our repository metadata, and that happens on fully air-gapped.
That's almost, well, I won't say it's paranoia level because it actually sounds like it's just good policy to me. But that is a bit more serious than a lot of people take security. Was there kind of an initial event that led you guys to take it that seriously, or was that just the mindset of the guys that set it up?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, most people set up this kind of thing to do kind of paranoid security things, but this actually comes from the requirement that we want to ensure and enforce that everything is free software. The air-gapped server part, that's just for security. But this whole kind of isolated build environment and building everything from source with whitelists, that's really the only way that we've been able to figure out. Given the developer resources that we have, to ensure that what is shipped is actually all free software.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of any incident, I don't think I can't think of any incident. And in terms of security, because we also publish all of our build recipes, links to source code, source tarballs, and the apps itself in a nice kind of index that's easy to read programmatically. Lots of malware researchers use our whole data set in malware research, and so far no one's found malware in our collection. And hopefully I'm not tempting anyone to try now.
Well, you want people to keep looking for it there, but you don't want anybody to try to push it in.
Yes.
And then, well, first, I guess I should say congratulations for lasting 10 years as a project. That's quite an achievement. Android was kind of just taking off 10 years ago, wasn't it? Has F-Droid kind of been around the whole time that Android's been popular?
Yeah. I think really that was a lot of people who were, in 2008, 2009, as it started, Android started to ship. People who were free software believers were very excited by the fact that Android was they open source all the source code, and so I think there was I was one of these people. We kind of jumped on it and said, like, okay, here's like a phone operating system that is not pretending that it's not a computer, and we can think about it the same way as we do our desktop computers, and where the idea of software freedom is well established. Certainly, even in 2009, it wasn't like a outlying crazy idea, the phone that I could buy now, certainly, and even in 2010, was much, much, much more capable than my first computer that ran Linux. So why shouldn't these run free software?
And so do you guys kind of think of F-Droid as almost being like a distro unto itself?
Yeah, it's often an easy way to quickly communicate it. The problem is that we don't control the OS, right? Google does. And even though Android is officially free software, you can really use all of this, 100% free software and build a working phone. It's not developed at all like free software. It's developed like proprietary software, and so they develop it in private in a team with not a lot of public interaction. And then when there's a release, they ship the source code and they just kind of throw it over the fence, I guess is one way of doing it. So like where most people are like, well, why do we have to all build the same library in our app again and again and again? And that's because that's how Android was architected. And if we want to work with Android as it is, the over 1 billion users, we have to work, we can't pretend that it's a Linux, it's a GNU Linux distro. We have to work within those constraints, even though, we all fantasize about making it work much more like Debian than like Android.
So, Hans, I'm very interested to understand, how does the project organize itself?
We are, I think, like many free software projects, that it's largely organized by people who show up and find a specific task that they think is important, and they do it. And then we communicate when we need to. There's a lot of different people involved. It's there's many different pieces. For example, I do very few app reviews, and I'm not really involved in the whole kind of publishing process, but I do a lot of the kind of core tool work. And then there's other people who say know the server side better. There's other people who have are involved in making sure that the forum is running smoothly, and we've had outbursts of trolls and things like this that have to be managed, and there's thankfully contributors who have managed that, and then there's tons of translators. We use a wonderful free software project called Weblate to do all our translation. And it is a crowdsourced translation, and so we have, I think, like our website's in something like 13 languages. We're about to ship a couple more languages on the website. The client itself is in many more languages. I think there's probably 60 or more translators who have contributed. And then, so we have like a, chat room, Matrix and IRCs, where we do a lot of certain groups chat there. And then there's some people who are active on the forum, and some people who are active on GitLab. And then there's some levels of overlap.
Right. So I noticed that the donations are going to a limited company based in the UK that appears to have been founded by Kieran in 2013. What's the relationship of the project to that limited company?
Yeah, so Kieran is the founder of the project, and he founded that when there was only a handful of contributors. And that runs the kind of the servers, that pays the bills for the build servers for the most part. And then there's also, so we have, you can also donate via LiberaPay, which is another free software service that we promote, and a new one called Open Collective, which is also, it seems to be mostly free software. So the donations to LiberaPay and Open Collective, those go to the people who are doing the app reviews, individuals. So you can look on those websites. They're really cool sites in that you can set up a group, set up the people who are in the group, and then see who's getting the donations. And I think in a lot of levels, a lot of us are, our infrastructure is Debian based. A lot of us use Debian as our main system. And I think Debian is really a great example for a lot of the stuff we want to do in terms of making, the software is about these kind of moral issues of free software, and that we should we should be organized around, the kind of these ideas. And so in terms of money, I think we've talked about, well, when donations come in, should we have like a company or like a central organization and with a like a director, or
you have one though.
It's not central. Yeah, it's true, but not all the donations go to F-Droid Limited.
So right, really, I looked at the website, and all the donations on the website are going to the Barclays account that belongs to F-Droid Limited. F-Droid only has one director, which is Kieran. It also hasn't filed accounts for 2 years, and it's about to be struck off. And really, what I'm digging into here is, about your decision-making processes and your ownership of the collective work, which is the repository. I get all that everyone is very, very cool with being a collective of geeks. I'm digging in here more into the, how have you organized yourselves for when you disagree with each other, and for when the money runs short, and for when there's a serious copyright challenge. Those sorts of things. I'm interested to understand who the decision makers are, who elects them and checks they're still the right people. That's really what I'm digging into here, and I wonder if you've got any comments you can make about that.
Yeah, it's a thing, and then it's something that we need to get more organized about. Right now, so Kieran is not so active anymore, but he still runs the kind of core infrastructure, and And we're trying to get organized to kind of spread it out. And so this is where I think Debian is also a model where that Debian there's kind of no one central Debian organization that gets the money. There's many. So we're trying to, that seems to work for us the best. So yes, if you donate Bitcoin, if you donate a bank transfer, if you buy the t-shirts from Hello Tux, those go to the Barclays account that Kieran runs, and that pays for the infrastructure. And you can see based on the filings, no one's getting rich off that. But then the Open Collective and the LiberaPay don't go through that at all. There's no relationship. And so right now, Open Collective gives us a group. And then in terms of decision making, we've had a lot of discussions. What we've mostly been operating under is what we call kind of lazy consensus, where we have an admin tracker, issue tracker, which you can go to on GitLab, where any kind of not code issue is discussed. Sometimes these have to be private just to contributors. So we had a whole issue with some apps that were there was a whole fight over banning some apps in F-Droid, whether F-Droid should include it or not, which you can read on the forum. You can read did some blog posts about it, and that made us realize that we need to come up with clearer ways of decision making. I think the good news is that for the most part, there hasn't been much disagreement between the contributors. Sure, we disagree, but not but we've always been able to always, as far as I've seen, always have discussions, at least, that we're not devolving into trolling each other, yelling at each other, flame wars, things like this. It's still very, I think a lot of us are not born organizers. So it could be done a lot better.
Right. It's always good to fix these things before you have a problem, Yes. So it would be really good to see that, because F-Droid's really quite important to the free software world, and I see you at the moment centered around a UK limited company that's about to be struck off the Companies House register. It's been gazetted 3 times now for not filing accounts. You don't appear to have an elected leader like Debian has in the Debian project lead. It's not clear that you have a structure for validating Debian. Ultimately Debian is run by the FTP masters, and maybe we could dig into what your equivalent structure of that is. But it sounds to me like would be a really good time to put some things together, because it sounds to me like everything has rolled along nicely while everything's been good. Were you to ever hit a bump in the road, there would be a serious problem.
I 100% agree. And we've had in the last 6 months a lot of discussions and about how to set this up. And around the same time, in terms of the finances, I think this Open Collective thing is looking pretty nice, and we are moving. The aim is to move more stuff there. It has kind of a built-in reporting structure, and it does fiscal sponsorship, so we don't need to have an accountant that manages a UK corporation. This is similar to things like I think it's Software Freedom Conservancy that does this kind of service, or other things.
Yes. There's actually a few organizations around that do that. So as you're European-based, you might want to look to NLNet or to CCT in Germany, or indeed to the organization that I run called Public Software, as a way of hosting. So, I host OggCamp, for example, for exactly this reason, that it needed somebody boring like me to look up, make sure the accounts were filed regularly and the bills were paid. So there are
that's
plenty
great.
of organizations around.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit with NLNet because we got a grant to work from NLNet. That's another thing of funding is that a handful of us have written grants to do F-Droid related work. So a lot of the kind of software development of new features on like the client and privacy related stuff has been coming from grant sponsored work. Like we just currently got an NLNet grant to improve our detection of tracking. And there's a blog post you can read all about it. And so from that we said, okay, yeah, maybe we saw that NLNet had the service. I think our next step is, we've had a lot of discussions. I think what we need as our next step is to actually get a bunch of people in the same room together. Because, maybe this is my bias. I spend a lot of time in chat rooms and reading and writing text, but I find that hard decisions and discussions like this are usually much easier in person, using a voice, and it always helps to eat and drink together and have good time together, and so it's not just endless email discussions. So that's what our goal is, to have our first kind of contributor meeting this year.
Hey, I'm loving this conversation, but I can't let Simon have all the fun. We've got some questions from the chat room and then some things I want to get to. But before we do that, we have an important announcement, and that is that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by CacheFly. CacheFly is a CDN, a content delivery network that has been innovating content delivery since 1999. They are now bringing you 100% cache shield. With this new feature, you will benefit from a drastic reduction in data transfer fees with AWS's S3 and other cloud storage origins by increasing your cache hit ratio to 100%. Consumers expect 4K content to be instantly delivered at any time on any device anywhere in the world. It's time to step up. Whether it's your web page loading, your video buffering, or your games downloading, you just have to get faster. You can't do that when your cached items are being evicted for large one-off requests, costing you a fortune in data transfer out fees. With 100% cache shield and CacheFly's guaranteed availability, there's now a simple way to avoid this. 100% Cache Shield is a next-generation content delivery solution for today and tomorrow, and is a dedicated storage space just for you. Keep your data and content closer to your customers without the traffic of other companies. You can purchase as much space as you want, and your data is fetched from 100% Cache Shield rather than from your origin, and shielding reduces your origin speed by thousands per month, guaranteeing no cache misses. It will also remarkably improve your download speeds because of no buffering. And they give you guaranteed availability with the highest quality of service. You can easily and reliably scale your video streaming to reach global audiences of any size. Get hyper-fast download speeds, low latency, and a scalable solution for gaming. Your podcasts will be delivered quickly and reliably without delay or timeouts. Receive lightning-fast digital download speeds for large digital files no matter where your customers are. CacheFly's global throughput performance dominance ensures that any cache misses are delivered 5 times faster than from your origins. Just for TWiT listeners, CacheFly is giving away a complimentary detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and usage trends. See if you're overpaying 20% or even more for your CDN. Learn more at twit.cachefly.com. That's twit.cachefly.com. And we thank CacheFly for their support. And Hans, let's get to some of these questions from the chat room. Okay. One person I know was asking about Huawei. Somebody was saying that they were interested in getting a Huawei phone, and they're no longer able to push the Google Play Store. Is F-Droid something that is an alternative for that?
Yes, absolutely. I think at this point, a lot, if not most, of the F-Droid contributors use a phone with only F-Droid as the App Store. So it is a possibility. And we also, we tried to reach out to Huawei to say, hey, look, we have a whole app store. You can customize and do whatever you want with it. But unfortunately, they did not bite.
So I was going to ask about that, whether there had been any official talks there. So if it's not somebody like Huawei, how does a developer, how does someone get a phone that runs only F-Droid and not the official App Store?
Yeah, so there's many ways. There are a handful of small options where you can actually buy a phone. For example, the Fairphone 2, if you has this very cool thing where you can switch the ROM to Fairphone Open, which is a Google free ROM, and then it comes with F-Droid built in. Unfortunately, they didn't do this for the Fairphone 3, but their main issue is not free software, but updatability. Then if there's organizations like Calyx Institute in New York, they have Calyx OS, where you can, they're building a whole ROM, secure ROM, privacy-based ROM, and ISP with F-Droid as a provider. There's Copperhead. There's, if you are wanting to be the most pure free software, then really 100% free software, then you can use Replicant, which is a ROM that you can flash yourself, and that also uses F-Droid as the App Store. And then I think probably my guess is that most people who are using it are people who are downloading custom ROMs and flashing it themselves. So, for example, Lineage is the most popular, and there's this kind of close fork of Lineage known as Lineage for MicroG, which also builds in F-Droid. And that's the MicroG project is another super important project in the Android world. It's replacing a lot of the core features that Google Play Services provides with 100% free software. So we're also a supporter of them.
How closely does F-Droid work together with these guys, like the Lineage guys?
Lineage. So one of the F-Droid core contributors, C2Sai, he's also a Lineage developer, and so he's kind of a main connection to Lineage. Over the years, we've talked, even when it was CyanogenMod, we said, hey, you're shipping a ROM without an app store. Why don't you ship F-Droid? And for whatever reason, they haven't wanted to. I've never been entirely clear to me, but we've asked over the years.
It's pretty easy though once you have a ROM, whether it has an app store on it or not, to get F-Droid installed. What does that process look like? Is it pretty easy?
Yeah. So if you're flashing a ROM, most people, well, I think the well-documented thing to do next step after flashing a ROM is flashing what's known as GApps, G-apps, the Google binary, proprietary binaries. But instead of flashing GApps, you can flash what's known as F-Droid privileged extension, which then embeds F-Droid into your phone to make it act like a full-on app store. Do things like update in the background and automatically and things like that. And that looks exactly the same as flashing GApps.
So can you run F-Droid if you have a locked bootloader? Because to be able to flash something, you've got to have an unlocked bootloader and the ability to flash something like that. And a lot of phones from the factory are locked down to where you can't do that, aren't they?
Yeah. So F-Droid is also just an Android app, and so you can install it like any other Android app. And then it operates, and then you just can't have things like automatic updates because you have to click on every install unless you have system privileges. And the other hard thing about it is that you will not find F-Droid in Google Play because of Google Play's terms of service do not allow anything like an app store in it. So that means you have to go to f-droid.org and click the download button in order to install it.
Makes sense. Hey, we had another question from the chat room from the Andromedan who wants to know, do you guys limit Maven repos to only trusted repos when building?
Yes, that's exactly how we work. So Maven repos are the online collections of libraries in the Java and Android world. And the only way we've been able to figure out how to enforce free software is to whitelist the Maven repos that we know also enforce free software. So that's something like Maven Central. Maven Central requires that you upload a source jar and I believe license information and all that.
And then a question from Jojo Dancer wants to know, well, the first part is, do you guys have an idea about how many people are using F-Droid?
That is an often asked question, and since from the beginning we have said we don't track our users, we don't really have a way to answer it very clearly. So we've kind of come up with inventive ways for curious. For example, one of the things I did is if there's a crash, you'll get a prompt that lets you send the crash in an email. So it's an opt-in crash report thing. So you have to click the thing and send the email. And so we get lots and lots of crash reports from those, like thousands. Not to say that an F-Droid's so crashy. I don't think, it crashes, but not so bad. But what I did then is that, so we have some, in the work with Guardian Project and my own personal apps, I do have those in Google Play. And so I just did some simple statistics of like, what's the ratio of crash reports to downloads for these apps? And I found a kind of a range, like I guess the least crashy app to the most crashy app. And that put us between 100,000 and 10 million users. And that was like 3 years ago. So we're somewhere between 100,000 and 10 million users. Yeah.
That's quite a few. He goes on to ask, given that there's so many users and so many apps, how do you guys keep up with doing code review to make sure that someone doesn't slip something real crazy into one of these apps? Is some of this automated? And then how many code reviewers do you have?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of steps. So we do have some code review happening when you usually, for the most part, that happens on a new app because we look for the standard trackers and other things like that and figure out how to build the app. There is some automatic code review happening. Not a lot. We'd like to do more. That's part of this NLNet funded work. But what we do is I'm also a Debian developer, and I've seen over all the years of Debian, I think people have this idea with free software that there's every package is detailed, every release is inspected and taken apart and audited, and that's not really the case. But what is so I ask myself this question a lot. It's like, so Debian has quite a good track record. There's not really bad software getting uploaded to Debian. How does this work? And for me, I think a key part of the answer is that the whole process is visible and logged publicly. So that's something that we do. So every build that we publish, we try to keep up forever. Sometimes they have to be taken down for things like trademark and copyright issues. We also include a related source tallball that's generated at the build time, which is published and downloadable. And that means that there's this, and then there's also now build logs. The whole log of the build is published as well, so you can download that. So that provides, if someone finds something suspicious, they can go and look at our releases and see the build log, see the source code that was used to build it, and see if they find it. And then the last piece, which we're doing more and more, which is the idea of reproducible builds, which I'm wearing the T-shirt, so I'm going to just show that.
Nice.
And that we have verification.f-droid.org, and that is just a server that runs our whole build server, and it just tries to rebuild our apps and see if there's any differences. It's on a totally different network, totally different country, and from there we're getting there's a handful of apps that are actively trying to make sure that all their builds are reproducible 100%, but the rest don't, and I think we have at least a third of them reproduce at this point. So that means then we have this permanent record of everything we ship, and I think that, you're looking at the GNU Linux distro's experience of doing the same idea. This seems to really dissuade people from trying to inject exploits into the software. I guess because it's publicly logged and people can track it down. But that's my guess.
So just for the sake of our listeners, go ahead and tell us first off, what exactly do we mean when we say reproducible builds? And then secondly, I'm curious what kind of problems have you guys run into trying to reproduce some of these apps?
Mm-hmm. So reproducible builds, the idea is that someone can start with the source code alone and build it on their setup and end up with the exact same binary. The goal is bit for bit perfect. And that means that so if someone modifies the build server to inject malware, which is an attack that has happened in one of the biggest Android, some of the bigger malware attacks were done by modifying the toolchain rather than the app source code. That just ensures that if the one developer's laptop gets exploited, that you can catch it, because you'd have to exploit both the developer's laptop and the verification server that's reproducing the build in order for it to pass. Yeah. Is that?
So to pick up another question from the chat room, Wojo asks, since nearly all of the apps that I see on F-Droid are free, what motivates app authors to use F-Droid?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, we need to, there is a lot of free software apps out there already. And, people are doing it for all sorts of reasons. But everyone needs to eat, everyone needs a place to live. So free software doesn't necessarily mean we're, anti-commercial. Like, and one of the things that we've tried to do to help there is to make the various donation services more visible. So in this kind of build recipe, there's also a bunch of metadata, and that includes the ways to donate for that app. And then when you look at that app in F-Droid, you will see featured prominently are the donation buttons. We've talked about the idea of nag screens and more pushy ways of asking for money, but this was one that was more controversial. So gentle promotion, everyone agreed with. Being more pushy and naggy or requiring payment was more controversial, so we've kind of left it at the gentle nagging.
Right. Does anybody donate that way? Do you have any way of knowing?
I don't think people are making a living from it alone, but people do donate. I don't know. Yeah, I have never really looked into it that much. I mean, things like a lot of the people have Bitcoin donation links, and as far as I know, you should be able to see how much money comes into a Bitcoin wallet. So that would be interesting to see. Someone could go through the publicly available data and see if people are getting any donations.
Because the challenge with asking for donations at download is unless people are having to repeatedly download the software, they don't feel grateful at the point of download. They feel grateful at the point of update, typically. And so one of the things that we found in the LibreOffice project was that if we asked for donations when people were updating, they were much more generous than if you asked for donations in other places where they were on their way to some other place. And I wonder whether the project has thought about how to make the software that F-Droid distributes sustainable financially, or whether you're just leaving it to the developers to work that out for themselves without really much more than a nod towards donations.
I think there's general agreement in the community that we should do more there. I'm personally, I mean, this could also be colored by my view, which is that I think we should be doing a lot more there, and we can be doing a lot more. But I don't, I am one contributor. So I think that we did do some sketches in the client. Actually, we have it pretty well laid out of doing something like what you said, which would, because we have this, what's called the updates tab. And there's a handful of things it shows you, like updates, whether you have a software update, but it also shows you if there's kind of a known vulnerability, it prompts you to uninstall it or update it. And we thought, okay, this is a place where we could also throw in like, hey, you've been using this, you've been updating this app for a while. How about donating? I think that that could get in there. So if there's an Android developer who thinks this is a important issue and is willing to talk to, weigh in and get people's agreement, I think we could totally get that into the client. And another thing, I guess this is kind of similar to our thinking with like the F-Droid Limited, is that a lot of us like things more decentralized. And so there's now even, there's the kind of one official client, but there's at least 3 other clients that have different approaches on this. And they've also, so these are written, I think all of them are written by kind of individuals, and they therefore have a lot of freedom to explore ideas about like how to promote donations. So that's another thing. Like we're happy to see someone who make their own F-Droid client for Android and with the goal of saying, okay, how can we make this something that actually means that free software app developers make a living from this?
Right. So do you have very many commercial apps in the F-Droid store? I remember when I first installed it, I was a little disappointed that many of the apps felt young, and that there wasn't a lot that was in the way of fully functional software that was associated with commercial services. Has F-Droid progressed to where there's more commercial software now?
I guess I would say yes. I'm trying to think of. So yeah, we have two nice examples recently, which I like. So our process of getting an app in can be a bit painful, and not always for good reasons. A lot of it is just that we don't have a team of engineers making a really smooth build process. We have volunteers for the most part, and occasional grant-funded work. But 2 organizations that have gone through the effort. We started with, there's an app called Osmand, or OSMAND. I forget exactly how you say it, but it's an offline map app, which is my map app, and they are making a living from that app. They sell it in Google Play, and then it's always been freely available without cost and free software in F-Droid. So that's one model that people have been using, is they charge in Google Play and they give it for free in F-Droid. But then 2 apps that have recently come along. One is the private email service Tutanota.
Right.
They did the work. Their app, they said, okay, here's our email client. It's free software. Submitted it. You can find this in the issue tracker. That we said, well, okay, here's this problem, this problem, this problem. If you include this, we're going to have to mark you with tracking. I think that they removed it. And then we had to mark it with non-free network because their server-side software is not free software. But they did the work. They showed up, they did the work, and their app is free software in F-Droid. And another good example is the newspaper called Taz, T-A-Z. It's one of the bigger newspapers in Germany. It's all in German. And they have a nice Android app. And they also decided that it was worth their while to try to get their app into F-Droid. And it was, I think they were a bit surprised at the process that when we came back and said, this is not, you have to remove this in order to get allowed. But they did the work, and it's in there and it's maintained.
That's awesome. It's great to hear that you've got some traction even in the commercial world. I do want to ask, we've got a question about halfway suggested by Wojo. Is there a rating and review system built into F-Droid? If I really like an app, can I give it 5 stars? And if I really don't like one, can I give it 1 star and a scathing review?
You can always give any review you want on whatever social media you want is the kind of cop-out answer. But this has been one of maybe the earlier test of some of our community decision making, that some people really thought it was essential that we have ratings and reviews built in, and other people in the community were opposed, mostly because we couldn't see a way to do it without tracking people. And from the beginning, we in all F-Droid software, we don't track people. Like there's no logins and things like this. And actually, I believe that's one of the client app forks started over this issue. It's called G-Droid. And so that one, if ratings built into the app are important to you, you can look at G-Droid. There's another one called M-Droid. There's kind of a theme there. I think that one might also have apps and reviews. And then some of the ideas, the other side is like, we're mostly, in terms of server infrastructure, we're largely a volunteer organization, and none of us are particularly good. There isn't this whole team of DevOps people. We're like people who do it. We do software development and running these servers, but we'd rather not run servers. But and the idea of a ratings and reviews service means, okay, that means we have a bunch of personal data that we have to defend and maintain and keep backups of. I don't want to do that as a volunteer job.
This sounds like a perfect place to ask the question, are you guys planning to use blockchain anywhere? And this might actually be a place where that makes sense.
I mean, me personally, no. I mean, this is, I think, I know with a lot of the cryptocurrencies, there's been quite a bit of interest. People who are involved in cryptocurrencies have been quite involved in F-Droid as well. And I think because of, excuse me, some of the, like the reproducible build concept, for example. So the author of the Bitcoin Wallet app, I think it's just called Bitcoin Wallet. He has done a lot of work to make sure that app is reproducible in F-Droid. So I can't speak too much to blockchain because I don't know a lot about it, but it's also, again, like not only is all the software free, but we also you can pick which piece of this whole thing and implement a version of it yourself. And that's great. Like, so if you want to fork our client and make one that requires Bitcoin donations, I'd be really fascinated to follow that.
That's great. All right, time for the hardest question of the day. You have to think back on everything we've asked you and then do the set math. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you really want to let people know about?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that maybe people don't know about so much is that, so we have big app stores like Google Play, like Apple App Store, I believe it's called, or iTunes, I forget. And there's certain advantages of having these giant app stores. But what we're seeing more and more is that these app stores are work in many countries, and they do business in many countries, and they have employees in many countries, and they are then being ordered to censor apps. So, for example, in Hong Kong, Apple removed this HK Map app that it was like a live map that showed all sorts of things on it, and they were ordered by the government to remove it because protesters were using it to I don't know the details. And so here we have this huge hazard of, well, if mobile devices are tied to giant centralized app stores, which then are, not only have the ability to censor, but are more and more required to censor, like this is the beginning of a slippery slope. And for us, that's something why we think that not only just F-Droid as itself as F-Droid.org and our collection of apps is important, but also just the idea that here's a whole app store. Everything you need to run your own app store is just sitting there waiting. And if things slide further down that slippery slope, it's not hard to start another app store, and we can have mobile devices where the apps that we need are available and not censored. And it also, we see versions of that based on, Apple and Google are both based in the Silicon Valley, where high-speed internet is plentiful and all over and very affordable. That's not the whole world. There's many places in the world where the internet is expensive or hard to get to or limited to the country, that you can't even get access to those app stores very easily without lots of tricks. And so that's, for us, has been quite fascinating. One, we've seen, for example, there's, I think, at least three custom app stores built with F-Droid in Cuba. Because in Cuba, they have their non-internet, they have their local networks that are not on the internet, that are set up by people, and the connecting to the internet is really expensive. So we see that they've customized the App Store experience based on their situation on the ground. Or another I saw in Tunisia, where their developers have a hard time getting payments from Google Play or Apple iTunes because there's something about their currency isn't convertible. I don't really know this currency stuff. And so someone started an app store in Tunisia based on this. And then there's also Google and Play is entirely blocked in Iran. And so there's a custom app store in Iran based on F-Droid. And this to me, I find quite fascinating. Oh, and then I guess one maybe that's more not necessarily political. There's Kali, which is Kali Linux, is this security GNU Linux distro, and so they did a custom version of F-Droid App Store with the idea of just making a Android device that's devoted to security pen testing. Which when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's awesome. I never would have thought of that, but here's this like devoted device, and it has just what you need for doing this specific task, all at one click away.
Hans, we could keep you on for another hour and talk, I think, and give it a year, and we'll have to have you back on to do just that. But we are hitting up against the hard time out. I have two final questions I'm required to ask you. I'm contractually bound. First is, what's your favorite text editor?
Emacs.
Emacs. Randall's in the chat room. He'll cheer from there, I'm sure. And then what scripting language do you prefer?
Python. F-Droid's pretty much all Python. We love the Python.
Python is becoming more and more of a popular answer, and I must admit I'm kind of giving in to the sway as well. The last project I started, I chose Python for it. Hans, it's been great to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, hopefully in about a year we can catch up and do it again and see where the project has gone.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right, that is F-Droid. Simon, what do you think?
I think F-Droid's a key part of the free software ecosystem, and it needs to exist. It hurts to say it, but I think it's overdue a refresh. It needs to look at its governance and its decision-making structures. And I think that it particularly needs to look at sustainability and the motivation of app developers if it is going to continue to be a viable pathway for people's software freedom to reach their phones as well as their laptops.
I think there's a lot of open source projects that started in somebody's garage, so to speak, or, it's one guy trying to scratch his own itch, and they get some success, and then finally they've got kind of this user base that's become big, or, a whole bunch of developers, but they've not thought about the business side of it that's sustainable, or they've not thought about the bus factor sustainability. And so there's actually, I think there's a lot of projects that are in this place where the guys just need to sit down and have this hard discussion about, what it's time for our project to grow up a little bit. What are we going to do?
Yeah. Well, as us old guys with gray beards begin to die off, the issue is going to get forced sooner or later. But, it's a great project, and I very much value that it exists, and I've used it frequently. And I really do hope that they're able to grasp these issues and resolve them so that they can have another 10 years of success.
Yes, I hope so too. And I didn't think of it during the show, but I actually have a device. It's not here locally. It's used at another location, but I've got a device that doesn't have the Google Play Store on it. It's just F-Droid. And there's like 2 apps that we need off of F-Droid. And that is all that we do with that tablet. And it's great to not have to worry about having the Google Play Store on there.
Yep.
Oh, all right. Well, we weren't kidding. We are just about out of time. Before we let everybody go, we need to talk about what's coming up. We have on April 8th, Hydra, a framework for elegantly configuring complex applications. On the 15th, we have PIMCore, which is a digital experience platform. On the 22nd, XCP-NG, which is an open source hypervisor based on Zen Server. On the 29th, we have something called Contractor, which is aiming to be a universal API, kind of an API framework. We have an opening on May 6th, so make sure and get your suggestions in. Have the project coordinator email Randall over at merlin@stonehenge.com. And then May 13th is NetData, which is all about real-time monitoring. And that's what's coming up. You may notice that's not very many on the schedule, so get your projects and have them contact us, and we'll get them scheduled up. Randall, again, was not here because he is not feeling well, but he did want me to mention that he is looking for a new gig, preferably something Perl, preferably something he can do remote. And if you're interested in that, check out randallschwartz.org for his resume. And then I will mention that every Friday, check me out over at hackaday.com and do a weekly security column there. Try to keep everybody up on top of what's going on in security news. Simon, anything you want to plug?
Well, I will plug the same as you. First of all, I would say to everybody listening and watching that if you need the guy that wrote the book on Perl to work on your project, he is available affordably and immediately. And you should immediately go to randallschwartz.org to go and look at his resume and hire him. And then on my side, I've just finished at the Document Foundation. I've finished at OSI. I'm embarking on new activities. I don't think I'm going to be going to any shows in the near future, so I would welcome your support on Patreon or on GitHub sponsors. In both places, I am Webmink, WEBMINK.
All right. Simon, thanks so much for being here with me. I've done this show solo before, and it is very stressful. It was great to have you today.
It's my pleasure. I've not been on for a while because you haven't needed anybody to ask impolite questions, but I'll be back next time Randall feels that there are impolite questions needed.
Simon, you did a wonderful job asking potentially impolite questions very politely today. Thank you. All right. Well, I am Jonathan Bennett, and you've watched FLOSS Weekly. Thank you so much. Have a great day.